Hello, everybody. How's it going? So, this is going to be a vlog entry about a subject that I have been interested in probably for it's been more than 30 years now. And it's the topic of archaeology and paleontology and really, in some ways, alternative perspectives on archaeology and paleontology, excuse me. Which I was introduced to by a friend, the writings of several people that were interested in the subject of human history and whether or not the story that we're given by sort of the established sources of human history in an academic sense and other senses is entirely accurate. And one of the things that I'm really enjoying actually in recent years is watching as the climate of belief within the archaeological and paleontological mainstream is being slowly overturned. There is a book that's well known in the social sciences, written by a fellow by the name of Thomas Kuhn, called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And in a nutshell, what Kuhn is arguing is that there are dominant paradigms of knowledge that sort of dominate academic disciplines, that over time, when evidence begins to pile up, that sort of begins to poke holes in the standard narrative of these disciplines, there is a series of events that take place and sort of chronicles the backlash that people presenting new evidence face until it's completely untenable to maintain the original perspective on a paradigm in an area of human knowledge, and the paradigm gets overthrown, and in its place there's a degree of chaos that eventually reassembles itself into a new paradigm. And this is across all manner of scientific disciplines. It's not just archaeology or anthropology, but one of the things that we are now watching, particularly in the last 10 years, but 5 years in particular, is such a development taking place in the perspective of archaeology's narrative about North America or the Americas in general. And this has gotten a lot of heat and attention in the last few years through the growing prominence of folks such as Graham Hancock, for instance, who had a Netflix show that came out about 3 years ago, two years and a bit now, called Ancient Apocalypse, and had a second season on Netflix. So I followed Graham for many, many years. But also others, like in the mainstream. In the recent past, we've seen some pretty extraordinary finds that have generated a lot of controversy and heat in the subject of North American archaeology, such as Tom Demaray's finding of what he believes and what is documented as to be evidence of human habitation in the Americas as far back as 130,000 years ago. But whether that's accepted or not, what is actually happening in the archaeological and paleontological academic discipline is definitely what one could call a paradigm shift. And there's two particular areas where this is evident. The first was when I was in undergrad in the late 90s. I did intro to archaeology courses, and one of the things that one of the theories that even in the late 90s was taught not to be questioned and not to really be debated was what was known as the Clovis first hypothesis. Basically, archaeology in North America, archaeology of the Americas had entrenched itself in this perspective that human habitation began in the Americas no sooner than about 13,500 years ago, right at the end of the last ice age. Because the oldest acknowledged evidence was at a place, Clovis, New Mexico, which dated around that time. And ostensibly, nobody had seen anything earlier, except that's not exactly true. Clovis first dominated the archaeological mainstream and anthropological mainstream for at least 50 years, probably longer. And there were incidences where people who presented evidence that said that Clovis first was not accurate were actually run out of the business. A famous one is Jacques St. Mars, who found evidence in the Yukon of human habitation in the Yukon as far back as about 40,000 years ago. There was evidence in the 60s and 70s in Mexico where a geologist and a team working Huayatlaco, Mexico, actually found evidence of human habitation going back even further than that extensively. And because of the Clovis first model and paradigm, the Mexican Archaeological Authority shut down the site and have never reopened it. And so nobody's been able to go in and see whether or not the findings were in fact accurate. But now there have been a number of sites that popped up, particularly in the United States, where it shows that there has been human habitation at least 20 to 25,000 years ago, much longer than Clovis first would ever have allowed. And so what has happened is the evidence has reached a sufficient point that it is undeniable that there was human habitation back much farther in the Americas than most people believe. And actually, interestingly enough, looking at genetic markers between North and South America, it appears there were multiple migrations over a very long period of time from various corners of the world. And that makes the colonization, if you will, or not the colonization, the peopling of the Americas, a very interesting subject to do much more work in. And it is taken for granted today that in fact, we don't really know how long humans have been in the Americas. The Clovis first model has been dead and buried now for about 15 years. And a new model is starting to develop, but there's with so much new information coming in at such a faster rate than ever before due to technology and that sort of thing. It's very difficult to really have archaeology or anthropology provide an extensive timeline that is in any way accurate. One of the other theories, which is interesting, which sort of prompted me to do this video as well, is I remember when I was in my introductory archaeology class, the other piece of this narrative about North America, because North America had woolly mammoths, giant sloths, camels, horses. In fact, it's believed that horses actually originated in the Americas and then went into other parts of the world. It is believed they died off about 13,000 years ago, and the predominant narrative has been that human beings killed them off. That as humans entered, so Clovis first and this the overkill hypothesis, the paleo overkill hypothesis kind of went hand in hand, actually, because at the same time that the Clovis first model predicted that people were entering the Americas, that's when they saw the beginning of the rapid die-off of woolly mammoths and other animals. But now what is being found is, in fact, that humans and these large megafauna actually coexisted with each other upwards of at least 10,000, if not more later. And the theory was that as humans entered the Americas, they killed off all these animals through hunting, which doesn't make really a lot of sense for a number of reasons. One, the number of people that were likely in the Americas would not sufficiently account for the number of animals that were probably here that were killed off. Just from that perspective, the overkill hypothesis doesn't make a lot of sense. Additionally, we see evidence in other areas of the world of so-called hunter-gatherer cultures and how they interact with the world around them and the way that they view interconnection and their role in the grander cosmic scheme of things, that you don't overhunt for what you need. You take what you need in a respectful way from the land and from the world around you, but you're not overkilling and overconsuming that which you do not need. And the model of the overkill was an ideological one as much as anything else, and it's starting to come to light that in fact was the case. That it was an attempt to show that there is something inherent in human nature that is destructive of the world around it, and therefore sort of bolstering, and get in trouble with this one, sort of bolstering arguments, environmental arguments about modern humanity, that human beings for tens of thousands of years have been so destructive to the planet, we are parasitic and bring nothing good, sort of as a mechanism to try to jolt change in the modern world today in terms of environmental practices. And in fact, though, as I said, we're seeing that that is not the case. Humans, for the vast majority of history, and in, as I said, predominantly hunter-gatherer societies, don't behave like people in 21st century North America in terms of their overconsumption patterns, in terms of any of that. That is a modern phenomenon, and I would argue it's a product of a modern culture that dates back to the Enlightenment in particular, maybe further, but really that period of time from the Enlightenment, the Age of Discovery going forward, where there was a cultural imperative for production and consumption, where greed became entrenched into modern culture, as various European powers fought it out for control of the Americas and other areas. That overconsumption and greed sort of phenomenon really developed over the last few hundred years. And in fact, it is a product of that. It is not an element inherent in human nature, but it's a cultural aspect that we have adopted. And this evidence shows that, in fact, basically bolsters that fact, that humans, could humans have had a role in the extinctions of these animals? And the answer is probably yes, but not because of overconsumption. It is now generally believed that approximately 11,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, there was a massive cataclysm that had a huge effect, particularly in North America. Various theories as to what it was about, but that brought about a case of massive destruction and environmental change in a relatively rapid way, particularly in North America, that accounted for a massive killing off of the Megafauna species. A documentary was produced a few years back called The Alaska Boneyard, and where a fellow actually has evidence of massive die-offs of megafauna, and due to a cataclysmic event over, in and around the time of about 13,000 years ago. And a lot of people have not wanted to study this site because it would in fact go against, very likely, sort of this overkill hypothesis, and also contribute to the paradigm shift that is underway that, in fact, North America was subject to massive environmental and ecological changes in a relatively short period of time around the end of the last ice age. That part of the reason why the ice age ended, that it was, there's evidence of massive flooding through North America, massive burns, fires that extended hundreds and hundreds of kilometers around the same time as well. So it's pretty evident that something pretty significant happened to the Earth, and in particular, they had a profound effect on North America around 13,000 years ago. And that, in fact, probably called off a huge portion of the woolly mammoths. That, in fact, it wasn't human intervention that began it. Human intervention may have ended it because people were looking for food. And so when the vast majority of the megafauna were killed due to other environmental factors, such as flooding and fires and all that sort of thing, and changing ecosystems in a very rapid state, then humans probably did contribute to the extinction of these animals, because not by overconsumption, but just trying to survive. And that is sort of where the evidence is leading. And so those are two major paradigm shifts in the archaeological establishment and the paleontological establishment that we're witnessing a revolution in. And it's an exciting time for those disciplines because sort of the old dinosaurs, if pardon the pun, are being drummed out of the discipline either through retirement or death. And a new breed of open-minded folks are coming in that are willing to actually take a look at some of this stuff and say, I think maybe we had this wrong. And they're willing to take a look. So one of the things on this channel that I'm probably going to be discussing a fair bit is new advances in those areas, because I find them very interesting. And like I said, we are in the midst of we're in an observation period of a paradigm shift in archaeology, and particularly archaeology as it pertains to our understanding of the peopling of the Americas. And so that's what this episode is about, sort of an introduction to this topic, and we'll see what we come up with later on.